All right, so this is going to be the practice AP questions for other elasticities. So let's get started. So here, if we look at this question, which of the following must be true for the original Michelangelo sculptures? Right? So first off, right, what's very important about this is this phrase, original Michelangelo sculptures, right? So we're going to assume that original Michelangelo sculptures are really, really rare, right? And so here, right, the correct answer for us is going to be D. The supply is perfectly inelastic. In other words, right, that the change in price, right, is not going to impact the supply of these statues at all, which makes sense, right? If there's original Michelangelo sculptures, right, Michelangelo is dead. And so he cannot produce any more sculptures. So no matter how much the price changes, if it increases by 1,000% or decreases by 1,000%, right, the quantity supplied of these Michelangelo sculptures is always going to remain the same, right? It obviously can't be B, right? Perfectly elastic, because that means that the percent change in price changes the supply a lot. But if Michelangelo is dead, it's not going to impact the supply, right? It can't be perfectly elastic, right? Yet again, it can't be relatively elastic. So the only thing we're left with is C. The demand is perfectly inelastic. But yet again, that doesn't make sense here, right? Mainly because the demand could change based on the price. And so here, the only correct answer left is going to be answer choice D as in dog. So this one. So if the income elasticity for good X is negative, and the cross price elasticity between good X is negative, which of the following must be true of good X? So here, this is pretty simple. If you can remember just between income and cross price elasticity, whether the coefficient is positive or negative. So for income elasticity, right, if the coefficient is positive, right, that indicates a normal good. Income is negative, right, remember that indicates an inferior good. For cross price elasticity, if it's positive, that is a substitutable good. If it's negative, it's a complementary good. And so here, right, we're going to say both these coefficients because the answer tells us is negative. So for income elasticity, right, if it's negative, it's an inferior good. For cross price elasticity, if it's negative, it's a complementary good. So we're looking for the answer choice that is inferior and complement. So is X, it's a normal good? Nope, incorrect. X is a normal good. Nope, incorrect. Answer choice C is an inferior good, but is a substitute. But remember, substitute, right, it has to have a positive coefficient, but we know it has a negative coefficient here. So this is incorrect, so it can't be C. Is it answer choice D? Well, it's an inferior good, so yes. Is it a complement good? Yes. So answer choice D is the correct answer here. For this one, right, so following a decrease in the supply of oranges, the price of oranges increased by 20%, which resulted in a 10% increase in the quantity of apple juice consumed. This implies that the cross-price elasticity demand is. So here, you need to know the formula for cross-price elasticity. Remember, the formula is the percent change in the quantity of B over the percent change in the price of good A gets us to our cross-price elasticity of demand. Well, luckily for us, right, we don't need to determine which one's good B or which one's good A. It tells us what the price and what the quantity is. So it said the quantity increased by 10%, right? And we know that the price increased by 20%. So here, we just do 10 over 20, which gets us to 0.5, which leads us to B being the right answer here. All right, now for the FRQ. So for the FRQ, right, I split up into different things mainly because I couldn't write it all in one thing. So here, for Part A1 for this 2016 FRQ, in the market for bananas, the equilibrium price is $1 per pound and the equilibrium quantity is $1,000 per pound. Right? Suppose the government imposes a price floor on bananas at $1.20 per pound here. Well, here, right, let's draw this out. Well, here we have the price, we have the quantity, right? We have our upward sloping supply and our downward sloping demand. Well, here, right, we know that the equilibrium quantity is 1,000 and we know the equilibrium price is $1. Even if you didn't know what a price floor was, what's important here is that $1.20 per pound. So let's say they start to sell it at $1.20, right? So they start to sell it up here, right, which is going to be our price floor. Well, here, right, our quantity demanded and our quantity supplied. So here, our quantity supplied is greater than our quantity demanded. So this is going to be a surplus of goods. So why surplus? Because, right, at the price floor, the quantity supplied is greater than our quantity demanded. So 2, now we're going to have to do a little bit more work here. So for 2, excuse that. So for 2, right, it says calculate the price elasticity of supply. Well, here we know that our equation for the price elasticity supply is the same thing as the equation for our price elasticity demand. So here it's the percent change in quantity over the percent change in price. But to get to the percent change, right, percent change equals new minus old over old, right? That is what our percent change is going to be. So if we just plug in all the numbers, because remember, it asks us to show our work. Well, here, right, percent change in quantity. Well, we went from 1,500 or 1,000 to 1,500, right? So 1,000 to 1,500 here. So here, we're going to do the new number, 1,500, minus the old number, 1,000, right, divided by the old number, which is 1,000, divided by the percent change in price. Well, here we know the price originally was $1 per pound, and now it's $1.20, right? So you should know from $1 to $1.20, it's a 20% change, right, or an increase of 20%. But for sake of it, let's just do it. So the new is $1.20 minus the old, which is $1, divided by the old, which is $1 here. So now we get to 500 over 1,000 divided by, right, 0.2 over 1, which is just 0.2, right? So here we get to 1/2 or 0.5 over 0.2. And then here you could just sort of plug into your calculator, although you're not going to have a calculator. This is just going to be 2.5. And so our price elasticity supply is 2.5 here. And since it asked us to show our work, you need to show basically this entire thing here, right? You could probably leave out this middle step right here and just go directly into the 0.5 or 0.2. But because this is a practice video, I wanted to show you the entire process here. All right, so the last part of Part A. Well, between $1 and $1.20, is the supply going to be elastic, unit elastic, or inelastic? Explain. Well, we already calculated in 2, right, that our price elasticity supply, right? Oops, yet again. Forget all this. Price elasticity supply is 2.5. And we said for elasticity demand and the elasticity supply, if the number is greater than 1, right, that is going to be an elastic number. It doesn't matter if it's demand or supply here. So because our price elasticity supply was 2.5, right, we are going to be supply elastic, right? And asks us to explain, right? It says to explain. Or explanation could be as simple as because the price elasticity supply is 2.5, which is greater than 1. Remember to write this out. It is elastic. Right? And so that is it for Part A. For Part B. So Part B it's an entire graphing question. So one asks, well, just bananas are an input for muffins. So just draw a graph for muffins, for the market of muffins, indicating PO and QO for the equilibrium price and quantity. Well, that should be pretty simple, right? So remember, we have to label our axes, right? We have our upward sloping supply, and we have our downward sloping demand. And here, right, we know that this is going to be quantity 0 and price 0. So if you just drew that graph, you got points, right? So B1 is actually pretty simple. Well, B2 is asking, well, what happens, right? What happens if there's an increase in the price of bananas on the muffin market? And we know that bananas are an input for muffins. In other words, to produce muffins, you need bananas here. And so if the price of bananas increase, well, how is that going to impact our supply of muffins? Well, here, our supply of muffins is going to decrease. Well, why is it going to decrease? Well, because bananas, a resource needed to produce muffins, became more expensive. So if you just drew that, the supply curve shifting to the left, you got another point here. Well, 3. On the same graph, completely shade in the area that represents the change, and this is important, change in the consumer surplus caused by the increase of the price of bananas. Well, here, right, it is going to be the difference what you should shade in is in between the two equilibriums, the new equilibrium here and the old equilibrium here. The change is in between there. Where a lot of students get points off for B3 is they just draw in or they shade in the old consumer surplus or they shade in the new consumer surplus. But that's not what this question is asking. The question is asking for you to shade in the change. And so that's why it looks sort of like a parallelogram right here, because what's shaded in red on the screen is the change in consumer surplus. So the last part, part C. Well, here, right, we know the cross-price elasticity is -2. The cross-price elasticity. So here we know, right, for cross-price elasticity demand, right, if it's a positive number, it is a substitutable good. If it's a negative number, it's a complement or a complementary goods. So here, if the question is asking, is it normal, inferior, complementary, or substitute? Well, we know it has to be a substitute or a complement. So we automatically know that it can't be a normal good, and it also can't be an inferior good. If our coefficient is -2, a negative number indicates a complementary good. So if you just wrote down complementary goods, you got a point there. All right, so here, assume that the supply of coffee is perfectly elastic. And this is very, very important, right? So here, yet again, if we're just drawing it out, our supply of coffee is perfectly elastic. In other words, it is a perfectly horizontal line. Well, using the equilibrium price and quantity given above, right? So our equilibrium price is $3, right? Draw a correctly labeled graph for the coffee market and show how the impact of an increase in the price of muffins on the coffee market here. Well, here we know our supply. We also know our demand is just a regular curve, right? And so here, our quantity is 100 cups per week. So this will get you a single point. But this only answers half the question. The second half asks us, well, what happens, right, if there's an increase in the price of muffins on the coffee market? Well, from part C1, we know muffins and coffee are complementary goods. So in other words, people are always going to buy these two goods together. So here, if there's an increase in the price of muffins, that means people are going to buy less muffins. But if people buy coffee along with muffins, if people buy less muffins, people are also going to buy less coffee. So the second part of the question, right, you're going to have to draw our demand curve shifting to the left. And then this is just the new quantity right here. And so that will get you the full points for part 2. Part 3. So part 3 is a tricky question. This is a question that College Board likes to give to kids, assuming that less than like 10% of the kids are going to get it right. So this is what differentiates some from getting a perfect score 5 to like a normal 5, right? So you can still get a 5 on the exam without knowing the answer to every single question here. So for here, we have the original quantity of 100 cups per week. If the increase in the price of muffins is 10%, they want us to calculate the new equilibrium quantity in the coffee market and show your work. So here, this is actually, it seems a little difficult, right? But it's actually pretty simple. We already know that we're looking at the cross-price elasticity. And so remember, our equation is the percent change in the quantity over the percent change in price gets us to our cross-price elasticity there. And so here, we already know what our cross-price elasticity is, right? It gives it to us. It's -2. So we already know, right, that our cross-price elasticity is -2. They want us to calculate the new equilibrium quantity, right? So we're still trying to find out the percent change in quantity here. But we know what the percent change in price is. It tells us in this question, if the increase in the price of muffins is 10%. So here, we have a positive 10% in the denominator. And so now it's just simple algebra, right? So here, the percent change in quantity is going to be -20%. But yet again, that does not answer the question, right? The question is asking, what is the new equilibrium of coffee? Well, here, if the original equilibrium was 100 cups per week, right? We just have to do 100 times -20, right? Which gets us to 80. So the new equilibrium quantity in the coffee market is 80 units of coffee here. All right, so I hope that cleared up a lot of confusion if you guys decided to do the practice. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.